Due to the following CBS School Break special, Magnum PI will not be seen today. It will be broadcast tomorrow in the regular time period.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
With Doctor Strange, I could really just embrace the earliest version of that character, which frankly looked like he was half English, half Asian in the way he was drawn in his first appearance. His eyes had a different kind of shape, and his whole aesthetic was really beaming the sense of Asian culture coming forward. But he also looked like a definitely much older guy, so I didn't hold back with that in the illustration. I'm somebody who likes to embrace age as a definitive characteristic that you can really get into much deeper character with somebody when you show more form and grit in the face. It's more shadow, it's more lines for the artist to hook into.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. I'm always happy to welcome Gamal Hennessey back to Word Balloon. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too, sir. How's life been? How's the summer?
Everything's good, man. We were just talking off the air. We were both at Terrificon at the beginning of August, and too busy to say hello. We saw each other from a distance. So I feel a little bit better when you said as well, because I'm like, oh, man, I know I was sitting outside, and I think I had the panel either right after yours or close enough that I was outside the panel room. So I saw you, but you were talking to people, and I didn't want to bother you. But, yeah, I'm sorry that we weren't able to hook up and say hello face-to-face.
Yeah, it's rough being popular. You were busy. I was busy. Things were happening. Then when I went to look for you, you were gone. So I was like, well, missed him again.
I never had a table. I pretty much was hanging out. If I needed somewhere to hang out and chill, it was usually in the green room. But I'm very excited for you, man. Now, is this your second book or your third?
This is, in terms of my nonfiction work in total, this is the third book. I did a book in 2010 that had nothing to do with comics. That was a nonfiction book. And in terms of my fiction stuff, I did 7 or 8 books, but this is not a part of that either. This is the second book in that series that I'm doing on the comic book publishing industry, where this book particularly is focusing on building a career as a freelance artist, as opposed to the first book that was focused on building a career at independent comic book company.
Yes, I zoomed into for the video audience to absolutely show the cover, the business of independent comic book publishing. And now you're taking a look at the freelance side, the business of freelance comic book publishing. And certainly that's, again, that's the ambition for aspiring creators, a chance to work for any of the publishers. And, God, I don't know what kind of how-to sources are out there. Certainly you've been so involved with the ins and outs of not only creating your own book and creating your own, publishing initiative, but the various people that can give a good firsthand knowledge of the things a freelancer needs to know.
Yeah, there's actually a lot more. There's a lot of books about having a freelance business, because freelancing is such a big part of the American economy now as a general aspect of like the overall economy. But to be a freelancer in comics, that's a very specific type of freelancing work that requires a different type of marketing, a different type of financial analysis, a different kind of legal understanding. So this book is going to be much more targeted towards those people who want to work in comics, but they don't necessarily want to have their own company at this point, at least. and they don't want to try to fight for a creator-owned deal. What they really want to do is, I think Mike Martz said this to me. He said, you want to play with somebody else's toy. You want to be able to say, okay, I had a run on Flash or Daredevil or any of these other books. But the other aspect that was really interesting to actually point out in this is that there's so many other different types of companies you can work for as a freelance. The main thing people think about when they think of freelance, they got to work for Marvel, they got to work for DC, but there's so many creators who are creating webtoon who need freelance. There's so many people in the crowdfunding space who need freelance. There's so many comic book companies that have a smaller footprint, but most of the work done in comics, at least in America, is done on a freelance basis. It's not one person toiling away doing the writing, the art, the lettering, the coloring, the production design. That happens a lot more in Europe, where you have more cartoonists than you have comic book professionals. But in most of the books that are made in America, it's a team effort, and a lot of people on those teams are working on a freelance basis. So there's actually a lot more people in freelance comics than there are in independent comics, because independent comics means you have to actually have an ongoing company that a lot of people aren't willing or able to do.
Understood. It is a weird time. I mean, my God, the entire world is dealing with the post-COVID economy.
Hmm.
And in fact, regarding the writers and actors strike, I keep pointing to a great quote that Mark Guggenheim had, where he said a television writer shouldn't need a side gig to just have a middle class income. But unfortunately, the reality, and I think freelance comic book writing and drawing probably is, you probably need a backup, a day job to kind of, and especially initially, as you're.
Hmm.
What has been your observation of the last couple of years, and also based on some of the conversations you've had with professionals on the other side hiring these freelance people?
Well, you have a lot of people coming out, especially if you look on Twitter with Comics Broke Me and like the whole thing about, the stagnation of page rates, where people who are working on high profile books and have, fairly long runs on these books are still not making enough to actually generate an income that required that, you can make comics as a living as a freelancer. And part of the actual analysis is that you have to do a lot of work as a freelancer that you're not getting paid for. To set yourself up as a freelancer requires time and money. And when you're doing that, you're not getting paid. Going out to hit the pavement to look for work is something that takes a considerable amount of time to do, and you're not getting paid for it. Chasing down your client, if you have to chase them down to get paid, is something that you have to spend time doing. You're not paid to do. So there's really only a small amount of your actual work that's paid for. So when you create a page rate, or however you get paid, because there's a lot of different ways to get paid as a freelancer, you have to account for the fact that 50 to 75% of the work that you're doing for that business is uncompensated work. So that's where you have to, like, either you have to have a spouse or a partner that's pulling in a certain amount of income, or you have to have a day job. And there's part of what we analyze in the book is that there's different levels of income, obviously, as a freelancer, but a lot of people are in what I refer to as the investment level, where you're actually making more money in comics than you're putting into comics, but you haven't made enough to actually stop working any other job. It's the equivalent of somebody who puts money in the stock market, but they're not a stockbroker. They can't stop working based on the money coming in from the stock. Or someone who invests in real estate, that you're not a real estate broker, you're not a real estate mogul, you just have an additional income coming in based on that activity. And for a lot of people, comics is the same way. The only difference is some people are trying to live off comics with income that doesn't actually meet the threshold of what you need to actually have that living.
I hear you, man. No, it's a tough economic time, and even prior to COVID,
Hmm.
going freelance comics is absolutely a tough path. Um,
Hmm.
you mentioned Mike Martz. Tell me
Yes.
some of the other experts that you speak to in the book.
Well, this book, the first book was edited by Mike Martz, and the this book is actually being edited by Joe Illick. Joe actually did huge amounts of work when he worked for Milestone. He worked for um, Heavy Metal. He's doing a
DC.
lot of
Yeah,
yeah, he's doing a lot of film related development work now, and he is an editor, and he's worked on both bringing in people as a free, hiring people as an editor and
yes,
working as a freelance on a freelance basis. So I wanted to bring him in to kind of give that perspective and to give Mike Martz a break because Mike had to deal with me for the first book. I didn't want him to have to do that again. Uh,
I
and it's
understand.
being the foreword is being written by Andy Schmidt. Now Andy and I worked together at Marvel, and he now has his own publishing company CEX where he brings in a lot of freelancers, but he's also worked as a freelancer for DC. He worked for Hasbro for a long time. He puts together teams of freelancers as part of like his creative service company.
Certainly.
So I know he understands how how a freelancer actually has to look at the industry and look at the world, and how the people who are hiring freelancers have to engage and look at them in terms of like managing the project, especially when people are geographically dispersed. They have different levels of income, different levels of experience, kind of bringing all those people together to make the book happen, hopefully on time and under budget.
Are you covering both the idea that, hey, I'm just a writer and I'm coming in looking for a job, but also I'm a writer and I've partnered with an artist, and as a team, we're looking for work. I mean, yeah, like what based on that, I don't even know what the right question is, but you know where I'm
Well,
driving.
yeah, you're talking about team building and referral. You're talking about somebody who's basically they go out into the world looking to work with whoever it is that will hire them, and then they'll figure out the working relationship as they go. And that's something that new freelancers kind of have to do because when you're new and you're trying to break in, you don't really get to pick and choose who you're going to be working with and what the project's going to be. But as you start to work with people and you build up those links where you work well together. You discover that you're like a Eastman Laird or a Claremont Byrne or a Wolfman Perez. Then it's when you're going into your next gig or the other freelancers going into their next gig, they can say, "Hey, this is because part of what you do to get a gig is you show the work you've done before. This is the person that I worked with before. We have a very good working relationship. If you need somebody in that space, I would recommend reaching out to him because what that does, and that's part of the way that you could get more work more rapidly as your career builds up, is that you get a reputation and you build up a network where people will reach out to you based on people that you already know because they'll say, "Oh, hire this person, he worked on this," or hire that person, even if they're in the same field as you are. Because if let's say you're an artist and I'm an artist, but you've got too much work on your plate. Somebody comes to you with a new job, you couldn't possibly take it, but you know it's a quality client. You'll say, "Hey, I've worked with this person before. You should probably give them work." And that's how you actually, once you build up that word of mouth, that reputation, it's much easier to kind of get your foot in the door in several places and have that work be more consistent. And one of the things freelancers really have to worry about is those dry spells, those periods where there is no work coming in, there's nothing coming down the pipe. So now they have to go back out into the street and kind of look for a new gig. And what I recommend is you should always kind of have feelers out for what the next gig is going to be and who is moving around. Because comics is such a fluid industry, the editor that you worked with today may be in a higher position next month. They may be in another company next month, or they may not be in comics at all.
Right.
So if that's the one pipeline that where all your work is coming in, you're in a vulnerable position. But if you know this editor over here and these people over there, and you know this other company starting up soon, then as you can actually plan your schedule based on who's got work and who knows that you're available, so that things are much more stable, if not, 100% consistent.
Are you able to get a sense of? Let's start with the big two.
Mhm.
Are the big two's doors open for new freelancers? I mean, how would you judge where they are in terms of newcomers?
I would say I do not have a good handle on the pulse of how many people they're bringing in terms of new talent and how many people they're bringing in terms of established people. But I get the sense, and I've always had the sense, even when I worked there, that unless there was a specific initiative to go out and find new talent, that the editors were much more comfortable working with people that they A, already knew, or B, that one of the other people in house had already worked with. Primarily because, especially when you're talking about comics at the conglomerate level, they need somebody who's going to do consistent work on time. Because their comics is a linear production process, if someone's going to wait for inspiration or they're going to wait for a mood to hit them before they actually start to create, they're going to miss the page delivery deadline. They're going to miss the printing deadline. They're going to miss the shipping deadline. They're going to miss the on sale date. Everyone's going to be upset. Nobody wants that.
Right.
So they would much rather work with somebody who they know is going to hit their deadlines. Hopefully, they're going to be early, but early is a big ask, especially farther and farther you go down the cycle. From what I've heard from letterers specifically, and this is only anecdotal, is that they are usually given the least amount of time to do the most amount of work, because as if the writer is late, the artist is late, that means the colorist will also probably be late. But the editor doesn't want to miss the actual cutoff delivery date.
Right.
So they just give the letterer a lot less time to work. Not really fair to the letterer, but that is how the process goes.
Chris Eliopoulos, every time I talk to him, and along with drawing those great Brad Meltzer children's books, he has not only himself but a whole staff of letterers and production people. And you're right, man, they are literally the last line of defense before going to the printers. And a lot of times it's, yes, sorry, but the art is late. Everything else, we need you to get it done by Friday. Period. It's deadline art. And that is something that I always remind some of my fellow podcasters who will critique books and be like, well, they use the same background in several panels, and I think that's kind of lazy. And it's like, no, they got to make a deadline, man. They got to get it done. And it's great when it's done and pretty as can be. And certainly they're trying to do that. But deadline is the biggest thing in this, that it has to be to the printers by X, so it could be to the distributors and the stores and digitally at the right time. So no, I so hear you, man. And it's great that do you then so beyond art and writing, are you also looking at lettering in your book as well?
We're looking at the entire production process. We're looking at the ways the freelancer, once they land a gig, they have to work with the client to actually realize whatever vision they had. Understanding that certain clients have certain requirements that you have to kind of deal with. In addition to bringing your own creative vision to a project, you have to work with someone else's creative vision, someone who probably cannot articulate or express that creative vision, because if they did, they wouldn't hire a freelancer. And so if you're looking at Marvel, DC, they may have certain character designs or certain requirements related to the movies, the TV shows, the video game, something that's going to happen 2 years from now that you don't have any idea of. But if you're working with someone who's doing their first crowdfunding project, and this is like their first comic, they are going to have much more different requirements and much more tighter control, or much more, maybe more confusion, because that is literally their baby that they're working with. And then you have all of the moving parts in between. We also look at the process of working with other freelancers when you don't actually have control over them, but you have to work with them to kind of get the book to where the book needs to be. And we look at things like how circumstances beyond your control actually impact the work that you're doing while you're doing the book. It may be something as minor as, well, your work, you're the colorist, you're waiting for the artist, and then the artist kids get sick. Well, okay, well, now you have to deal with that. Or it could be something as big as like COVID. Well, okay, now what do you do? The entire industry has shut down. So we look at the production process. The book is actually broken into four parts. There's foundation, find, fee, and finish. So you actually, in the finished part, we're actually creating the work within those constraints. We look at all the different things you have to consider to make sure that you could actually do the best work in a way that actually helps the client and all the other people working on the book deliver the best product.
Now, obviously, we mentioned DC and Marvel, and again, they are much more all about deadlines. Not to say that the other publishers aren't, but I would imagine there might be a bit more flexibility for the companies like Vault and Aftershock and the like that are the next tier. So, yeah, talk about that if you would.
Well, there's certain types of comics that are much less deadline heavy, depending on the way the client wants to release the book. So let's say if they're doing a creator-owned book that's going to come out it's not coming out at a specific time, then the client can have all the finished pages in the can, to steal a movie term, and then announce the book for solicitation and then send it to the printer. So nobody in the creative team is actually stressed out because they're going to hold on to the pages until the pages are done. So you're not rushing up against a delivery deadline that was set because all the other dominoes are in motion. They're holding on to it.
Yes.
There's other things like we actually recommend when a webtoon, if somebody's going to start a webtoon, that they have 40 or 50 episodes already done before they launch the webtoon page. And that way, nobody's crushed up against the deadline because they're actually making books. They're making the books earlier. So that in those situations, it's much more comfortable. Kind of crowdfunding is the same way. If you're working with somebody and they know, well, next July they're going to do a crowdfunding campaign. Well, okay, then, and they hire you in, August of 2023. Sure, I could do the lettering for that book that's coming out 9 months from now. Especially when the crowdfunding campaign itself, that's not the delivery date. That's the crowdfunding date, and they only need a few pages to run the crowdfunding campaign. You may have several months after the crowdfunding campaign to finish. So depending on the client will actually depend on the scheduling, which will actually depend on the crunch. So as if you actually open up the potential client base you're looking for, it's not always going to be that kind of abusive grind that you might have with, you talked about conglomerate publishing.
I know Dark Horse, in comparison to DC and Marvel, schedule their stuff, the next year or whatever in advance. And
Yes.
And again, and because I've just anecdotally heard that from writers and artists that are like, yeah, I'm working on a book. I'm not sure when Dark Horse is releasing it, but this is what I'm currently working on. So yeah, it is interesting. What for your own? We mentioned crowdfunding. Your campaign for this new book starts September 12th.
Yes, we're going to launch September 12th. We wanted to actually do it kind of after Labor Day, but have it wrap up kind of around New York Comic Con so that, we could actually do the push then. But we had a lot of success with the campaign for the first book. So it seems like that momentum is actually continuing on to this book because we have the pre-launch page is actually up and there's already a few hundred people already following the campaign.
That's fantastic, Gamal, really. And that is the beauty of, I think, the Kickstarter community in particular, that you're able to, build off the previous book and you've got a core audience that is excited for the next book. I think that's terrific.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And again, you cover all the bases. I know from your previous book as well. What let's see. Now all of a sudden I'm having a brain fart. What well, again, so the campaign starts on the 12th.
Mhm.
What other aspects do you think you bring to the book that people may not realize? Oh, these are things I need to consider as I get into the freelance business.
Well, I spend quite a bit of time talking about taxes, which is, of course, everybody's favorite topic. That's why people go into comics because they want to deal with taxes. But if you're working as a freelancer, you have to approach your federal, state, and local taxes in a way that's different than if you're an employee for a company. So I talk about how, who has to file, where you have to file, what you have to file, how you actually deal with, deductions, because a lot of people don't understand as a freelancer, if you set up a company, there are certain things that you can do to kind of reduce your tax burden and help yourself out on the back end. I also talk about how to deal with, compiling your tax records, how to deal with the potential of being audited because freelance creators are particularly vulnerable to tax audits. So there's a lot of things, especially when I talk to people who are just getting into the freelance business and they're trying to get any work at all. The last thing they're trying to think about, especially like we talked about before, having enough money to kind of pay their bills. The last thing they want to hear is, now I got to put some money aside for the taxes. And like, but unfortunately, we live in America. You got to
Yeah.
kind of put this money aside for the taxes. So this kind of helps them wrap their head around it in a way that can be helpful because we talk about the deductions and the record keeping and things that they can do to kind of make taxes less scary and more helpful as they're trying to be a freelance creator.
These are the kind of things again that you need to be aware of, and yeah, I'm really glad that you're writing this kind of book because truly some people are just thinking about, man, I wish I could write the Flash,
Mhm.
whatever, and not realize the individual burdens that come along with some of these things. No, man, again, it's a weird time.
Mhm.
Are the other and I'm sorry everybody, I don't mean to if you're from Vault or one of the other companies, we all know the pecking order of who sells the most comics, vice versa and stuff, but are these other Source Point and other companies, Scout Comics, Mad Cave, are they
Mhm.
looking for new people and freelancers, and does it seem like they're you
I
know
think there's always this kind of, especially if you're working with people who are, maybe you've got a line of creator owned books, maybe you don't necessarily, if you're expanding your line, that's usually when you're looking for more freelancers, because if you've got one book coming out a month or two books and you've got your creative team, especially if you're an independent and you just started, your company, you probably are handpicking your team from people that you already know, or you're doing some of the work yourself to control costs and things like that. But once you start to expand, once you actually start, you're having multiple crowdfunding campaigns a year, or you just acquired another company. That's usually when you're kind of looking for freelance talent. And even when you think you've got your stable pretty tight, you always want to have people like the backup, because you're never going to know who's going to drop out, who's not going to be available. Accidents happen, life happens while people are trying to make comments. So
yeah
you want to make sure that you have enough people, especially not necessarily, like I said, if you're doing creator owned lines or things like that, not necessarily writers, but artists, colorists, letterers, production designers. And the other thing that I go into in the book is that some of these smaller companies also need freelancers on the business side, whether it's marketing or print management
wow
or things like that. Because if they're starting up a company on their own, they may not actually have all of the skills to handle all of the things that go into having an independent comic book company. They may not know business management. They may not know project management. They may not know distribution channels. And so if you're a freelancer, it's not just about being a freelancer in the creative side. If you have skills that are business skills that can be applied to comics, and there are quite a few business skills that can be applied to comics, there's also space to get work in this industry. You just have to figure out who your ideal client is going to be and how you're going to get compensated. Because if you're doing marketing or print management, you can't get a page rate. You're not making any pages. But we go through all of the different ways that freelancers can be compensated in comics. So you could theoretically be doing one creative job for a client and one business related job for that same client and getting paid two different ways, which might actually increase your income to something that's more palatable. Like, for instance, if you're a writer and you're writing the script, well, you might also be able to write the marketing copy and the advertising copy and the social media copy and get compensated for that so that, nobody is going to know the book better than you anyway. You wrote the script. So as long as you understand how to write for those different jobs, that's more revenue that can be coming in. And maybe you're writing for one comic, but you're for another client in another company, then you're doing their like marketing writing, or you're doing their web design, or you're doing something else. Comics is essentially a small business. Even if you're talking about something like Marvel and DC, you take them out of their larger conglomerate spaces, they're still a small business.
Sure.
Small businesses have a lot of different needs in terms of how they have to get to make the business work. If you can fill one of those needs, you can make more money, not just as a writer, artist, letterer, colorist, but as those other jobs too.
Do you give examples of, for instance, and let's start with the basic creative side of the business. Do you suggest a writing sample length, a art example length, things like that?
Yeah, when we go into the process of finding work, we actually look at figuring out what kind of work you can do, what kind of clients actually fit the work you can do, and then how to go about finding them and how to go about, soliciting their employment. We have specific chapters on how to do a pitch, how to do a portfolio review, how to do a proposal if you're working on the business side, because every company has their own submission guidelines and every editor has their own things that they're looking for when they're doing a portfolio review.
Yeah.
We actually go into all of those different ideas, whether you're actually trying to get work from companies online or if you're trying to go to convention where you're like visiting booths, you're going to BarCon, you're doing portfolio reviews. So because there's a lot of different ways to find work, we actually look at all of the different ways depending on what skill set you have. So like if you're a writer, it's much harder to show somebody your portfolio if you're a writer, because an artist could just show their sequential art pages and that's it. A writer kind of has to get his own book at least 5 to 12 pages so that someone can see how they tell a story along with the script, because it's very difficult to get an editor or anybody else to read your script and then imagine the comic and then hire you based on that. So for writers, it's a little bit different. You have to be able to show your work and be able to do a pitch, because if your client already has their script, or if they already know what they want their script to be and they just want you to kind of put it into a more artistic expression,
sure,
that's one thing. But if you're working for more of a conglomerate where they're like, okay, we need an arc for Hawk Girl. Give us an arc for Hawk Girl. Well, now you have to work with the pre-existing character, and you have to be able to pitch that story in a way that's going to be interesting enough for the editor to pick it up. So we talk about the pitch process, the portfolio review process, the proposal process. If you're saying, well, okay, I'll come in and I'll handle all of your print and digital distribution for your comic. How do you go about creating a proposal that make sense in that space to get that work. So we look at it from all three angles, depending on what it is that you want to do.
Man, that's great. Again, I think a valuable tool for people that really want to break into the business, because it's hard to gather this information, and it's great to have a book where you can find all those answers and stuff. And again, I point to your previous book as well, and how well I think that kind of explained things. I know that for we mentioned too that, and as you say, sometimes it's easier when you have previous work, especially as a writer. I know for a fact that obviously, especially at the big two, they are looking at authors. They are looking at TV writers, people that have a body of work already established. And obviously, sometimes as you're breaking in, that's a little hard, a harder road. Are you finding, do you think starting your own webcomic, we mentioned that earlier and stuff, that sometimes there are self-starting initiatives that one person can do to kind of get things going? I mean, anecdotally, are you hearing that that's working for people? What is your from the freelancers? What are you hearing?
Well, a lot of times people who are their goal is to do freelance comics, they will go out and they will work on a book that may not have a high page rate. It may not have, major distribution, but they'll work on that book with the goal of saying, I need this to have a portfolio piece.
Certainly.
I need this to show, whoever it is at DC that I can actually finish a project, because this is a big thing when people are looking for freelancers. They want somebody who they know, or at least has shown that they can start something, they can finish something, and it's professional quality work, because they don't want to bring in somebody who is going to disappear in the middle. They don't want to bring in somebody who, if the inspiration is not there, they're not going to finish the work. They need someone who can finish something. That book shows that they can finish. Some people, they get into anthology, because an anthology is something that a lot more people can potentially see. They don't have the burden of creating the whole book. They can, 5 pages, 7 pages, 12 pages, get that work in, get that under their belt, and then take that to go and do the next step. Webcomic is another way to do it. Although usually the people that I see going into webcomics is a goal in and of itself. So some of them, they know that, you get enough traction with your webtoon, you get picked up by Webtoon Canvas program, and then you're off to the races. You may not want to be freelance anymore. So getting a digital comic, that could be a way to have that portfolio piece. But yeah, especially for writers, but even artists and letterers and colorists, they want to show that they've actually done some work too. And that's something that they could use, even if it's your own book. You use that to get your feet wet. Because I have clients, they put together their own book. They read this, they put together their own book, but their goal was not to have an ongoing independent comic book company. Their goal was to make a comic that they can then hand to an editor and say, I've done this comic. So that is one of the major ways you can go, especially if you're a writer.
I've certainly had my experiences with Artist Alley, with very talented people that have very ambitious, lofty goals that they never finish their creator-owned book. So I absolutely hear what you're saying. I even remember Josh Fialkoff when he was getting started at his company Horse and Buggy, and he would write 5-page westerns, and they were all independent stories. And that's how he was able to get an artist to help him and draw the book for him. So it wasn't that big of an obligation, only 5 pages and stuff. And ultimately, the guy became a thriving comic book writer, and now he's a big television writer. So, I mean, I think that's important, is to write something, finish it, and even, again, come up with small ideas. I myself, and I've never really followed through, but I've got my handful of ideas that I have. And knowing all that, I certainly kind of keep that in mind, that my ideas are one and done. I I haven't been able to crack the 5-page code. Mostly, I've done like ideas that I think would work best in 20 pages. Maybe, maybe something around there, less, maybe a little less, like 18 or 16. But yeah, it's no, that makes a lot of sense. And then art, my God, it's again, it's like we said, it's for the big two, it's deadlines. I know a woman that was ready to go with a Marvel book, and she wasn't able to meet the 30-day, publishing deadlines, and they had to say, sorry, you're not, it's everybody can't play for the NBA. You gotta be able to play the game, and the game in those cases is deadline art. So I do understand that. What I love is, and I don't know if you've discovered this, for a lot of starting out artists that have done their own thing, but never really either done comic book storytelling or even getting in the habit of deadlines and stuff. I know that there are veteran artists that are basically almost it's a paid gig for the end result artist, but a veteran artist will give breakdowns to this person who is doing their first graphic novel or monthly series or whatever, and it's a big help, and it kind of gets their head within the idea of storytelling rather than just, hey, I can draw pretty. And it's like, well, that's only half the equation. You really have to tell sequential art and tell a story that kind of makes sense as we're reading it from panel to panel and stuff. So I don't know if you've had the chance to talk to any artists like that do that kind of stuff.
Well, that's the core of Andy teaches quite a few classes in comics experience about drawing and writing sequential art. And one of the linchpins in the beginning of all of these courses is be able to handle something in 5 pages. Do not, for your first project, attempt to create a magnum opus of 192 pages because you will not finish it. It will be the project that overwhelms you.
Yeah.
If you could actually create a 5-page story and then get someone to draw that 5-page story and then letter that, because it does several things at once. One, it actually forces you to be concise with your narrative. Secondly, when you're going to actually realize that as finished comic book pages, it's not going to be a huge financial commitment. Because if you're hiring a letterer for $20 a page and it's 5 pages, well, that's not a huge amount of money.
Sure.
As opposed to hiring them for 192 pages. The other thing it actually does, it actually helps you understand in miniature the linear production process of comics. You understand how the script relates to the thumbnails, and then the rough pencils revise the script, the finished pencils, then the inks, if the artist is doing inks, and you can understand that process and get used to that process in miniature, in something that is easy to digest while you're still trying to work your day job and live your life, as opposed to trying to get this, massive tome out the door because you think the first book that you're going to do is going to be Watchmen. It's not going to be Watchmen. It's not supposed to be Watchmen. Do 5 pages and then work up to 10 and then work up to 20. And once you've worked up to 20, you have a single issue. And if you could do single issues at a certain cadence, you could do trades. And then, only then, are you ready to go into that whole graphic novel.
Understood. I was just checking out your preview page on Kickstarter. Not much there yet. Are you offering any sort of stretch goal premiums or anything like that? Talk about the campaign.
Well, what we're doing with this campaign is we're actually building on the previous campaign and the work that I've been doing in the educational and community space with Andy and Comics Connection.
Yeah.
So at the initial levels, you're actually, you get the digital version of the new book or the print version of the new book. At the higher level, you could, and if you missed it the first time, you could get the digital or print version of both books, the business of independent comic book publishing and the business of freelance comic book publishing, either both as digital or both as print or digital and print for all of it. You can get the whole package.
Sure.
At the higher level tiers, we're actually offering 3 months of membership in Comics Connection. Comics Connection is a online community designed to help people build and develop comic book business models, no matter what kind of business they want to be in. So we have the Discord that our members are on that are very active about all the different types of news that impacts professionals in the comic book industry. We have classes like 2 times a month on different aspects of the creative and business side of comics. We have open question and answer sessions every week. So no matter what you're working on or what you're interested in or what you have questions about, we take away the idea that comics is an isolated kind of creative process, and we surround you with people who are in the same boat as you, who have the same questions as you do, who are trying to get the same answers, and you can then be part of that community on an ongoing basis. The book, in a lot of respects, is actually just the start of the journey, because even if you get the book, things are going to change between now and the end of the year in terms of freelance comics.
Sure.
If you understand, if you're a part of this community, you actually can digest the foundational concepts, what it means to be in the business. And as new distributors pop up, or this company goes bankrupt, or these other new digital, platforms pop up, you could actually navigate all of those different things with a group of people that they run, brand new people looking to put out their first book, to people who have worked for Marvel and DC and Image for years and can actually help you at any level that you need help in. So if you you can join Comics Connection through this Kickstarter at the higher levels of participation and backing.
That sounds great, man. Also, you and Andy have been doing a lot of YouTubes where you discuss subjects like this. And am I right? Did you just drop a new episode this week or recently?
Yes, we have the Comics Connection podcast where Andy and I we do this once every 2 weeks too, where we talk about the major issues in the comic book industry, but specifically as they relate to independent, freelance, and creator-owned creators. Because a lot of people, I think, they focus on these stories and how they actually impact Marvel, how they actually impact DC,
sure,
or the MCU, and all of that is actually very interesting and relevant. But if you're trying to actually build a business in comics on your own, we try to actually help you figure out what all of this means to you and how you should actually use this to kind of navigate your career. We just dropped another episode yesterday, and that focused primarily on the discussions that were started around the Mark Millar interview and the idea that there hasn't really been cohesive comic book sales charts ever since Diamond's lost a lot of market share to like Lunar and Simon and Schuster and Penguin. But we also talk about the fact that comic book sales charts weren't really accurate to begin with because they weren't actually capturing readers, they were capturing retailers.
Right.
And how, if you're trying to build your own company, what you should actually be looking at in terms of sales and profit and loss and everything else to actually determine where you fit in and is what you're doing working, in ways that I think a lot of other podcasts, they don't get into that type of detail because they're not focused on that type of audience. All the people we work with are people who are trying to either build a business in comics or have a full-time career in comics. So that's how we talk about every issue.
And this is exactly what I tell people when they're like, hey, I want to start a comic book podcast. It's like, well, you need to have a unique voice. And that's what you guys obviously provide. And it's these kinds of resources. And truly, between Comics Experience as a teaching company, a school, and as a publisher with what Andy's doing and everything you're doing with your books and everything, no, it's a valuable resource. And I'm glad to help, make awareness out there for what you guys are doing. Because, again, you guys have a proven track record. I mean, that's the thing, both on the creative side and on the business side. So, that's outstanding, man. No, I'm really glad you're doing this, and I support your books and your other business initiatives to kind of get the word out. And that's the thing. This is an opportunity for people to not only buy the books, but get involved with your communities as well and get the answers, because it's always changing. Good Lord. Since COVID hit and post-COVID, think of all the different degrees of change that we've seen in the business. And I don't know. I mean, we said at the beginning of the conversation, comics broke me, that hashtag and stuff. I get it, and I sympathize, but it's from a lack of knowledge and understanding the business as a whole. And I think it's important that as people get into this, they've got a clear-eyed perspective on what's going on. And it's as I always say, and Chicken always laughs when I say this, it's not the elves, in the Keebler elves in the tree making cookies. It's a lot more complicated than that. And knowledge is power. So you need to know these things. I think it's great.
Yes. Well, the thing that is actually the thing that I can't, and neither me or Andy can actually solve, is the idea that one of the things about comics broke, that it's the idea that so many people who are in comics because they love comics. They're not necessarily looking at it as they want to make $1 million. $1 million would be nice, but if they wanted $1 million, they would probably not be in comics. So the people are pushing themselves to get into the industry, and they want to work with characters that they grew up reading, and a lot of them are willing to literally do anything to get into this business. And what we're trying to do is say, hold on to your love of comics. We're not trying to get you to not love comics, but we're trying to get you to balance the passion you have for the medium and the characters with what actually makes sense from a business and legal standpoint. And if you can capture that balance, then you're going to go much farther, because you're going to actually have the perspective along with the heart to actually get to where you need to go.
Sounds great, man. Absolutely. So again, here, move your head so we can look again at the business of independent comic book publishing, already out from Gamal Hennessey. And people can pick that up through Amazon and the like, Gamal?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's on Google Books. It's, anywhere major paperbacks are sold.
Excellent. And the Kickstarter campaign for the business of freelance comic book publishing, again, goes live September 12th. And, it sounds like Gamal's going to be ready for a presentation in New York Comic Con in October, which sounds great. What other conventions are you doing, man, coming up?
I think Andy and I just started talking about the 2024 season. I know I'm going to be doing MegaCon, probably Emerald City, C2E2.
Oh, good.
We might do Heroes, San Diego, and then New York. So 2024 is kind of already booked up.
Well, that's good to hear. No, and I missed you in Connecticut. Hopefully I'll see you at C2E2 in Chicago next year. That would be great. And same with Andy for that matter as well. And for people who want to watch your YouTube channel, what's the channel name?
It's called the Comics Connection Podcast, but if you type in my name into YouTube, it'll pop up.
Okay, there you go. So everybody, Gamal Hennessey and Andy Schmidt too, for that matter. Very informative podcast, and again, I recommend people to join this community, because these guys have the knowledge that you need to have the right perspective, as Gamal just said, to succeed. Good stuff, man. No, as always, I'm always happy to talk to you. And is there anything else you want to cover though before we wrap up?
No, I think people have heard me ramble long enough. Let them go do something else.
No, it's all good, man. All right. Well, have a great Labor Day weekend. I really appreciate you joining me today, as always. And, you and Andy, hey, if whenever you want a new conversation, put out the bat signal and I'll come running. You know that.
All right. Thank you, sir. Always appreciate it.
Absolutely. Gamal Hennessey, everybody. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for listening. And more great stuff to come as we say goodbye to August and usher in September and Labor Day weekend, where Balloon never slows down for a holiday. I can tell you definitely that we've got a lot of great content still coming up. So until next time, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.